Welcome to the Phillip Wiley Show. Take a look behind the curtain of professional hacking and hear compelling discussions with guests from diverse backgrounds who share a common curiosity and passion for challenges and their job. And now, here's your host, offensive security professional, educator, mentor, and author, Phillip Wiley.
Hello and welcome to another episode. I'm very excited today to have my good friend Darin Fredde joining. Darin and I, our history goes back to 1995 in our AutoCAD drafting days, which is kind of interesting. Back then, I was kind of a little more newer to AutoCAD drafting and a little more new to the industry. And my good friend Darin kind of helped me out with some things, as well as helped me rewrite my resume into a format that I used for many years. And so we were kind of parted ways for a while, not really parted ways, but kind of disconnected for a while. And then we met back up around 2013 or so. He had reached out on LinkedIn and about a job with the company where I was working. And then later on reconnected about 2015 and kind of stayed connected since then. We actually worked together for a while, pen testing. I helped him get on with the company where I was pen testing at the time. Really saw the talent in Darin, because just from what he was doing in regular security roles, he had that hacker mindset. He was able to figure things out. And originally I kind of told him, I said, once you get your OSCP, I'll recommend you. But one of the other people on our team had a sysadmin background, and he was one of our best pen testers. And I just kind of looked at Darin's mindset, the way he's doing things, and thought he would make a good asset to our team. So I recommended Darin, and he got hired on. And, I knew he was going to do good based on what I'd seen, but I didn't realize how good of a pen tester he was going to be. And I'd have to say he's probably one of the best pen testers I personally know. He's really skilled, and for the amount of time, he's been pen testing for a little over 5 years, which is a decent amount of time. But for the level and skill set he's at, he really kind of surpassed what most people are doing. So I've been highly proud of Darin and impressed with the way he's progressed. And I'm very happy to have him join the show today. So let's welcome Darin. So welcome to the show, Darin.
Hey, Phillip. Golly, I was actually, y'all couldn't see me, but I was blushing.
Well, it's all true. And I know sometimes, trying to get you to see that is difficult. And that's the same thing with a lot of us. We don't see how good we are, but yeah, definitely. And it's definitely glad to have you joining.
Well, thank you. Thank
you.
Yeah,
For the folks listening today, I had Darin on my other podcast, The Hacker Factor, on ITSP Magazine, and thought it'd be good to bring Darin back. And today the focus would be a little bit different. It was more on the other show. It was more towards his origin, how he got started, which we'll cover that. But I really like to have him share, some of his tips and tricks and favorite types of techniques to use on pen testing. Maybe this would help this be episode that's more helpful to people that are actually already in pen testing, as well as, there'll be some good stuff for those trying to get started. So why don't you start out by introducing yourself and kind of share with the audience how you got started?
Yeah, well, Phillip did an awesome job of kind of summarizing, so I'll just kind of hit the highlights. Phillip and I were good friends, and we had history with one another. So at the time, when I kind of look at it like this, Phillip, and I don't know how accurate this is, but Phillip crossed over. At one time, we were both CAD operators going into IT, and I kind of went Microsoft route, and then Phillip went different routes. And then, so when I was getting ready to cross over myself, I was a chief security officer and things like that. I started a dialogue with Phillip at that moment, and then later on that progressed into what Phillip told you. So it was just, we just had these interesting dynamics. But you were asking me about me. So, I've been around for a while. I would say I'm as accurate as I possibly could be. Is 2 decades of security and less security, more technology. I've worked for telecommunication companies, big companies like AT&T. I've worked for consultant companies in my IT days, kind of did the whole .com thing. I was also a CIO at one point, smaller company, but nonetheless, had been there, worked for broadband companies, things like that. And I always had a real interest in staying technical. Matter of fact, I kind of have always parted. I guess I didn't agree with everybody who said managers couldn't be technical. I always had the philosophy that they had to be. And it's a good thing I did that, because when the whole .com blew apart, and we were all starving to get jobs, I was still able to get work. And so in the security, I approached it the same way. I just knuckled down and started studying a lot. And I usually get to questions that I really want to know. And sometimes it requires a lot of research, because it's good to have a big network like Phillip. And he actually became my coach. It's so funny, because our paths have kind of changed around. Now Phillip is my coach, and has been for a long time. Has far exceeded anything that I've ever done. And it has really been a blessing in my life and helped me so much with elevating me and just talking me, just having really that support system around me. And actually this whole philosophy I have about networking in general has all came from Phil. I mean, so I get the luxury of having him as a best friend, but at the same time, I get this benefit of having a coach, somebody that will tell me, that will keep me real and honest. And he's right, because I am my worst enemy. I'm sometimes very critical of myself. So I know I have to be really good at managing my soft skills or not. But I had a really good base to work with. And I remember Phillip telling me I was very insecure about being a pen tester. And Phillip said, no, I think you'd be really good at it. And he believed in me kind of before I believed in myself. And then as I got into it, I was like, wow, I kind of see what you're saying. And I took different routes. When I first came in at US Bank, I did traditional internal pen testing like everybody does, and PCI pen testing. And I just noticed the way they were attacking was a lot different. And I really had this idea that I call it a paper tiger. I wanted to be, Phillip, I wanted to impress you. I mean, I wanted to impress people, because that's the way I'm driven. I'm just driven to be, I really wanted to be the bad guy. And I was thinking, how can I be the bad guy? And some of the ways we were attacking just doesn't appear to me was normal. So I started attacking differently. And make a long story short, Phillip, it's been a long series and I'm still learning. I mean, right now I'm fixing gaps, in my background and things like that. And I'm sorry that isn't as detailed as people want, but they can look at my profile and kind of put those together. But it's any success that I've had so far has been the blessing of friends and people in the industry and some of the great people, giving back to me.
And I think one of the benefits of this episode too, this is, when you get to do an episode with your buddy, one of the things that you share, Darin mentioned all these things that I've done for him, and earlier on he did a lot for me. But one of the things too is that, I'm sure you realize, or you should realize, is, you're a sounding board for me, because a lot of these ideas I come up with, you hear it before anyone else does. And it's always been helpful to have that support. Whenever I was telling you about starting a new podcast, you were supportive of that. A lot of the different things I've done, you've been very supportive. So I've always had a sounding board, and you're always like that, easily the first person to hear about what I was doing before anyone else did.
Yeah. And I know this show's about me, but I'm going to talk about you. It's been that way for me too, Phillip. I mean, I'm not lying when I say you have this creativity that I'm just amazed at. And sometimes I don't see your vision, but I've learned sometimes to stay out of it, and allow you to think through your process. And I've just been blown away at the ideas you come up with. And, and it's really taught me how to treat other people too, who I may think, oh, that would never work. And maybe flip it and make quick judgments when we should leave that idea in the oven, no matter how ludicrous it may sound. And so I've learned, this has been a very blessing for me. It's been fun. It's been enjoyable, and it's part of my story now. That's why I'm not embarrassed to talk about it, because, I guess, what is that saying, that we stand on the back of giants? That anything that I've ever had, has always been something. I do come up with my own unique ideas, but it's always something that's been freely given to me. So I share the same philosophy as Phil. I try to give back, and I follow in his footsteps because it's the right thing to do.
And a couple of lessons I wanted to bring out too, while we're kind of still getting started here, is the fact that there's some lessons to be learned here, because I always have people asking, is 30 too old, is 40 too old, or is 50 too old to start a new career path? And you're one of the examples that I share with people, because when you started Pentest, you've been doing other things and have built on that experience, helped you become a Pentester. But just some of those things, I think another good example too is, people our age, we're not too old to have mentors or ask others for help. And I think this is kind of a good example to share with people. Even though someone's been in the industry over 20 something years, it's never too late to listen to someone else, and they could be a lot younger than you too. And I think we could get, a lot from anyone,
Yeah, I have a saying. I don't even count the janitor out, because, people can choose the profession. It's not always about money to them. And I've always held that dear as a philosophy, and it's always paid off. And, some of my best ideas come from, having conversations with people about things. Because Philip is correct. I do have a lot of the characteristics of a pen tester. I have a very curious mind. I want to know how things work. And I'm always experimenting with things. And sometimes I part with conventional wisdom. People have ideas in the industry. So I'm constantly coming back to Phil and saying, how do you do with this? Or how do people do with that? And then it usually evolves. Even my attack style has evolved from talking to Phil. Some of it is more red team oriented. I call it full scope, and coming up with a name for it and trying to figure out and not reinventing the wheel. Those have always been, really pleasures to have conversations with somebody as Phil that's ahead of you, because I know that you'll give me an honest feedback. You'll say, well, I'll give you one example. When we were talking about my attack style, I was trying to come up with a name for it, because I knew it quite didn't fit what pen testing done. I was discovering every attack path, and I was living off the land, and I was finding a lot of old school conversations from older pen testers talking about this style of attacking. And then I realized that there was an evolution of pen testing, which kind of changed some of that. So I was talking to Phil about it, and I think I was using the word simulation, and you actually the one who said use the word emulation. You like that term better, and I went, ooh, I kind of like that, because I was trying to describe it, because I was getting accused a lot of being red team, and then I was kind of going, no, go read PTES. I'm just doing the full attack life cycle, and then I wasn't being argumentative, and obviously I was staying within scope. So I'm not trying to say that I was creating problems or anything, but what I was really after is to show risk, because I knew I could get domain admin, and I did, and I have many times. And I'm not saying that to be arrogant. I'm saying it because it doesn't really matter when we're talking about risk. What really matters is, for me personally, is how can I find your most covenant thing, which you hold dear? Can I do broken business logic and post to your general ledgers, and you have to do something like do a journal entry to write it out, and it messes with the integrity of your books? That's the CIA, and that's the I part of the CIA model. And I always come up with these ideas, and I would go to Phil and I would ask him questions. And I had to get, a lot of times, Philip, I had to get myself out of the way, because my imposter syndrome kicks in. Like, I'll give you an example. I was really good at finding passwords. I don't know why, but they just come to me, and I end up finding treasure troves and extracting them from things and get them. And I felt weak. I felt like this is me, the imposter syndrome going, and I would beat up on do I really want to be known as the guy who finds stuff? And then I started realizing how stupid it was, that was all my ego. And so I started embracing some of the philosophies and kind of parting with myself. So sometimes it's just getting yourself out of the way and learning the soft skills of how to manage you. And I guess that's where you and I have value, Phillip, is we've been through so much in our lifetime with technology that we have these jewels that we can share to people that are more human side, because there is a human side of these equations, when we're talking about risk and how to present risk and things like that.
Very cool. And so, what are some of your favorite hacks and things that you like to do? I mean, because you mentioned living off the land, but I know you've had some really cool things that you've shared with me that you've used.
Yeah, I have a lot of favorites. Some of them I've been Phillip said 5 years, and that's true. And I also, Phillip knows I've been doing a side gig also with Birch Klein, and I've been working under that umbrella as well. And then and to give me more diversity in my pen testing skills. And then I was teaching also, and so some of them I was stuck. I was like, how can I talk about it but not talk about it? And so I had to get through that barrier first, and I figured out how other people were doing it, and I could talk about it. So some of the ones that I'll tell you some funny ones, but let me answer your question first. I mean, I like them all. Some of my favorite ones are things that go unnoticed, like I don't know, this may sound red teaming, but is RD hijack, RDP hijack, is that a real threat? Well, I can guarantee it is. I've done it many times. People leave their sessions open, and what a great way to gain access to Covenant SQL environments and everything else. You immediately inherit their session, and you're in there, and it's very commonly overmissed within organizations once you get in. I like those. I like to go inside and then go up to the cloud if it's in scope, because people are blind to it. And I like to find blind spots. And I like cliffhangers because I love movies. One of my favorite ones that kind of is worn out now because it's very common knowledge, but in the beginning of a lot of the Azure testing, Phillip, they had this little toggle box that if you took the person out, either because they discovered them or you were asking them to clean up your account once you got global admin, and you had the box, you own the whole subscription, but if they took you out without looking to see if the box was checked, they really didn't get you out. And I liked using that as a learning experience, in the exit meeting. And I had done that, and I kind of used it as a cliffhanger. And I actually, in that test, I actually told them to take me out, that I had gained access to it, but I left that and I set them up for it because it was more impressionable. And I don't think any of those people will forget. And, this is where we kind of get into arguments. That sounds red teaming, right? But is it really? I mean, I wasn't really testing their ability to catch me. I was really showing them weaknesses within their environment. So I like Active Directory because it's about 90% of what people have internally. I love Azure because it's up and coming. As you start going further out in the applications, they get a little weaker, Phil. And those are areas I'm trying to plug, like APIs, web app pen testing, and getting really good at those type of deals. I love coming in from the outside. I've actually gained access, and then I'll stop right here. But I wanted to go in to tell them about the funny situation that people could go look up with your news report, because since it's in the news, we can kind of talk about it a little bit, and I thought it would be kind of funny.
Yeah, sure. You can go into that.
Well, okay. Let's see how I can do it without getting us in trouble. So Phillip was on a newscast. I encourage you to go look it up. And the whole time, Phillip, I can't tell you the details of the narrative of what happened because I'm under a non-disclosure. But what I can tell you is it didn't happen the way the news presents it. And that I can tell you with the most confidence. And the reason why I can tell you is because I'm the one who done the pen test. And the whole time Philip was doing this, it was just a funny coincidence. They came to Philip and they asked him if he would be on the news. Was it channel 4 or
Channel 8, I believe.
Channel 8. And it was an investigative reporter. And he was, I think, would it be fair to say you were jonesing, you wanted to tell him it was me, that you knew the Pentester or something? Or
yeah, it was definitely in the back of my mind. You just kind of wanted to say, but really couldn't because you're NDA, then because also too, I really didn't want them coming to you if you didn't want to talk to them and didn't want any kind of trouble for you.
Well, I don't mind saying it now because it's in the open now. It was in a news report, and and it's obvious that the company did. I'm not telling you any trade secrets. You can go watch the newscast, but Philip handled it like a pro. I mean, we went through it, and it was just a really good laugh between the two of us behind the scenes. And it's just been really interesting. Our relationship went on, and I will say this. The reason why it was handled so well is because of Philip. Remember, he's my best friend. So every philosophy and things that I've learned how to pen test, a lot of it came from him, asking him questions and getting answers. And it was a good thing that I learned it that way, because when I got into scrapes or I got into difficult situations, sometimes that are gray areas, in pen testing, I knew exactly what to do. I knew how to handle it, how to do it properly. And I sometimes found out, sometimes I was the minority in the room of knowing it. And it was all because of my background and my relationship with Phil, and it sounds like a shameless, you either believe me or you don't. It's just the truth.
And one of the things I think is worth sharing too, that's a good example of what you do. And another example I share with people is just kind of how, before you've worked on some pen tests, and maybe I think maybe the first time was maybe as WebSphere that you're doing a pen test against. And one of the things I saw that you did that I thought was really clever, and I think is really good because you went in more educated when you're assessing that technology you have experience with, was reading the manual. As you already hear, RTF, read the fine manual. And that's one of the things that you're big on. One of the things I see you do and have been impressed with, and I think it's been part of your success with testing new technologies, is that you went in and read the documentation, learned about the technology, before you actually started testing or during a pen test.
Yeah, a lot of that's driven by I just don't know. And it's hard for me to admit that, because everybody likes to think they're a great, pen tester. Well, it's not that hard. I usually lead with it because it relieves the pressure from me. And so I do read a lot of manuals. Even when I'm pen testing, and I try to, if I'm prepping for a meeting, I try to find out what technology you use. It's actually turned into OSINT techniques for me that I'm really good at. Doing techniques like that for the outside for external pen testing. And I actually found one in hindsight. I maybe even could have, turned it in. I don't think I reinvented it, but I remember Philip was talking about this one file. I don't think it's this one, but it was in a talk I was using. There was these UDR files. Well, I'd never heard of those type of files. So I was looking at them and I was investigating, and I found that leaked, credentials every once in a while. And sure enough, it was doing it. And it was like, it's like finding that needle in the haystack. So I had techniques I was already using to kind of find those things. And that led to my foothold. And it was all because I studied that. Now, later on, there was a patch release for it, and that was me backing into the problem to find that, because a lot of times when you find things like that, you have to write a solution. So that's part of reading the manual too, is that if sometimes there's known good techniques on how to protect against that, and it's literally in the manual. They're talking about it, but people just didn't implement it. So there's a lot of value with reading manuals. I'm generally really interesting, and we were just talking about before we got on the podcast. I told Philip, yeah, I'll just add it to this long list of things I don't know. And so I'm constantly working on a list of things I don't know that at the level I want to, because it's impossible to be an expert at everything. and you got to be willing to put in the work.
Yeah, one of the things I want to touch on too, because of course, a lot of the listeners are people that want to get into pen testing. So, based on your experience, kind of how you learned, what would be, based on that, what are your recommendations for someone that wants to get into pen testing?
Well, the first thing I would say is find a mentor, and then vet them. Make sure your mentor, your coach, um, is good, and then make sure he or she or whoever you want to call that person is the right person for you, and that you have a good relationship with them. And that was kind of my secret, is finding a sounding board, because I already knew that I was going to come up with things that I didn't have answers for and that I couldn't find in books. And it still happens to me this very day. And all that means is you're on the right path. That means that you are coming up with ideas. It doesn't mean you're a genius. It just means you're coming up with questions sometimes that there are not clear answers to, that require research. So I would say you need to trust that part of your instincts and embrace it. Now, the bad news is it can slow you down. If you're trying to achieve an OSCP or immediately get out there, it sometimes can, that paralysis analysis, that you may go through can slow you down. So you have to govern that and put that monster in a box and manage it. But don't be afraid to do that. Don't be afraid to ask questions that nobody would ask, like what I just asked you. If P-Test tells you the full life cycle, did that mean they were writing about red teaming also? They don't say that. They're talking about pen testing. And that would be a question, right? And I'm not asking us to answer that. I'm just saying sometimes you'll get curious questions like that. And so having a coach that you can go talk to about that and that can provide you guidance. And Phillips never gave me the answer sometimes. It sometimes is frustrating. So you want to go, what's the answer? But he knows me well enough to know that I'll dissect the fly and that eventually I will come up with my own idea. And he just kind of nudges me a little bit. And so having somebody that knows you that well is really a plus in your camp that can mentor you along the path. And like right now, my goal right this minute and for myself is that I could go get the OSCP, but I know those techniques really well. And so it may be better for me to do the web, pen test. So that's one of my goals. And that came out from talking to Phillip. So I encourage you to do that. I would say having a really strong foundation. I've noticed that even when I was doing IT stuff, Phillip, that I could run circles around most of my peers, because it wasn't because I was the smarter than them. It was because I put forth the time to understand the basics. And I started realizing that if you had a really good sound foundation of basics, that you could build off of it pretty easy. So a lot of things that I'm doing to this very day is really anchoring off of things I know, and I try to build even memory anchors, because my memory is not near as good as Phillip's is, and so I had to kind of build ways to kind of remember things, because sometimes I get misjudged on an interview, and when it's just the fact that I'm just older, I'm older and I've seen a lot of technology, and so that's why we have computers, right? They're resources.
Yep. And everyone, it's just kind of hard to be able to think of everything on the fly too. You got to have good notes and stuff to be able to keep up with that, because it's impossible to recite everything you know. So as far as people wanting to get started, what would you recommend as far as if someone's going to learn web app pen testing or network pen testing first? Do you have any recommendations on how to start out?
Well, I'm biased, first of all, because you're talking to somebody who's going to be stronger in the network pen testing, because my background really gears towards it. However, think about what I just said. I'm biased. So maybe you are too. So maybe you take a page out of Phillip's book, and it's not a shameless ploy for his book. It's just the truth. having an inventory of knowing what you're good at and what kind of makes you tick, like what makes you want to get out of bed in the morning, what inspires you, and leveraging that to go a certain direction, because I can always re-gear to become a web app pen tester or things like that. So that was my approach. I kind of started doing things I was strong at and that I liked doing and that my job allowed me to do. And then, and then kind of worked into it that way, because it was a lot easier for me to break into the business that way, to, understand things. So I wouldn't say one's better, like if you're a programmer and you have a programming background, you may be much better at DevSecOps, and development areas and things like that. So I encourage students and stuff to kind of take an inventory of what they have, which Phillip does as well, and then leverage that to kind of set your path to how you get your foothold, just like you would hacking. How do you get into the environment? How do you gain a foothold? And then how do you build out? And you may have to do a stair step. And what I mean by that is if the top of the ladder is there, it doesn't mean I'm going to be able to get to the ladder at the first shot. It may take me 2 or 3 times and 2 or 3 jobs to get there. And I've got to be patient, and I got to be willing to pay the price, to put in the work, to have the beginner's mind again. I'm having to do that right now. I'm having to have a beginner's mind and humble myself and learn. And I think that having that, no matter how you good, maintaining that and humbleness, it's not just a philosophy, it's actually good for your ability to learn.
Great advice. We're getting down towards the end of the show. Is there anything you'd like to share with the audience before we close out?
Yeah, I hope, I know I said a lot, and it wasn't prescription, like do this, do that. That's probably the differences between Phillip and I. It's what I admire about Phillip is he's real good at laying things out in a level. My strength's a little more, sometimes philosophical and other areas, and he has that too. It's just different. So I would say, look me up if you want questions, or if you want to even have free time. I give away free time all the time. I talk to people. It's one of my favorite, most excitements out of the whole industry. I actually enjoy that more than I do anything else. I love the collaboration. So if there's anything you want to know, and ask me tough questions, I'll try to answer them the best I can.
And one of the things we'll do too is in the show notes, we'll share Darin's Twitter and his LinkedIn account, so you can message him through that way. It's a good way to get in touch with him. And I know periodically and from time to time, he always takes time to help people out. So take him up on that if you need some help. And one of the things I'll say too is even if you have a mentor, it's good to have multiple resources, multiple people that you can go to. And so Darin's definitely someone I would recommend that you connect with. So thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, Phil. I appreciate it. And man, I can't thank you enough.
Well, thanks everyone, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you for listening to the Phillip Wiley Show. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. In the meantime, to learn more about Phillip, go to thehackermaker.com and connect with him on LinkedIn and Twitter @Phillip Wiley. Until next time.